Now, an unknown sea creature was washed ashore at Rouseham Head in Stronsay in September 1808, leading one expert at the time to declare it was solid scientific evidence for the existence of great sea snakes. But a contemporary largely discounted the evidence of the people who found the remains and insisted it was a decomposing basking shark. It's a story that's told again in a newly published account for the Royal Society's Notes and Records. I've been hearing from the author, Dr. Bill Jenkins, who's at the School of History, the University of St Andrews.
The first person to see the creature was a man called John Peace, and he found it floating in the sea, but it was actually then washed up on the beach and rapidly drew a lot of attention because it was a creature no one had seen before. It had the appearance to them of being a sea serpent, and they contacted the local justice of the peace, and 4 of them gave their testimonies as to what they'd seen.
Which means that we've got really quite detailed accounts of what it was that was washed up, haven't we?
We do. They all gave quite detailed reports, which were then sent to Edinburgh to the Vernerian Natural History Society, which was Scotland's leading natural history society at the time.
And pretty quickly, 2 key experts emerge who are trying to work out what it is. A man called Berkeley and a man called Home.
Yes, that's right. John Berkeley was a renowned comparative anatomist, and he came to the conclusion that this was a new creature, a creature new to science, and it was identified it with the great sea serpent. The second character was also an anatomist and a surgeon in London who wrote a paper on the beast for the Transactions of the Royal Society in London. He came to a very different conclusion. He believed from his own experience with basking sharks that this was in fact a basking shark in an advanced state of decomposition. So the 2 came to very different conclusions, and there followed a quite heated dispute between the 2 men.
So this is happening at the beginning of the 19th century. So I suppose it's kind of the beginnings of real serious attempts to be rigorous and scientific in understanding what's going on around us. Is that perhaps why this debate by these 2 men is so interesting still to this day?
Yes, and the 2 men were both as close to being professional. They didn't use the word scientists at the time, but professional experts as you could get at the time. Most natural historians were wealthy amateurs. There were chairs of natural history at universities, but in Scotland at least. But there was nothing like a modern research scientist. So these 2 figures had as much authority as anybody did to talk about these things at that time.
What do you think it was that was washed up at Rouseham?
Well, I think almost certainly it was indeed a basking shark, and Home was quite correct in that. However, having said that, I think it was quite reasonable for Berkeley to believe that this was an unknown sea creature. The idea of sea serpents was taken quite seriously, certainly well into the middle of the 19th century. This is beginning 1808, it was discovered. And it didn't seem unreasonable that given the vastness of the oceans and how little known the world was, how little explored the world was, at this time, that there were large creatures still waiting out there to be discovered. Also, it says interesting things about Berkeley's trust in ordinary people too, that he believed these eyewitness accounts. He was something of a man of the people himself. His own father had been a tenant farmer in Perthshire, whereas Home came from a more elevated background. His father was also a medical man. So Berkeley was more likely he knew these kind of people, and he was more likely to trust their judgment than Home.
So Holmes' approach is basically, it can't be what you thought it was, so what is it? I, as an expert, will tell you because I know what's out there. That's really the contrast then, is it?
Absolutely. Home is the expert, and he's quite prepared to completely dismiss the evidence of the people who saw this thing because he knows better. Perhaps you can tell I'm a little bit biased perhaps towards Berkeley, but although Home was right.
Dr. Bill Jenkins there, and we'll put a link to his paper on the Radio Orkney Facebook page after the programme.